Live everywhere.
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Waldman. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Friday. We made it. It doesn't make any difference in terms of calming down the news, as I mentioned in today's morning post. But it's Friday, June 2nd, 2017. The end of week 19. I forgot to note at the beginning of the week that it's the week week 19 of the Presidential Apprentice. I like to keep track of such things. 20 weeks begins next Monday. It doesn't mean anything in particular. Nobody ever has a 10-week plan or even a 20-week plan. And, of course, it doesn't mean anything legislatively. Nothing has happened in the last 20 weeks. However, as we were reminded yesterday by Sam Stein, an article, by the way, I think I forgot to include in the roundup. I wouldn't say it was, well, okay. I mean, Sam Stein's a great guy and everything, but that wasn't the most impactful article I've ever seen, so I think we'll be okay with that one. I hate to throw Sam under the bus immediately, but that's just because I have new tires on the bus, and it's no big deal. Sam can handle it. We can all handle it. It's Friday. We can do whatever the hell we want on Friday, and as a matter of fact, we're going to do just that. As you know, we are without Greg Dworkin on Fridays, but that's okay because it creates time for us to bring back Arliss Bunny, who has not been on the program for some time. We're going to give her a few minutes to settle in, get herself a glass of water, relax, but I wanted to bring her back on at her request, and I can hardly refuse such a request. And she's got to update you on what they're doing over on the Hopping Mad Show. They've got a fantastic interview. Well, we know it will be a fantastic interview. It hasn't happened yet. Secret of behind-the-scenes production techniques, etc. But later on, a big interview coming up that is exciting for many of you, particularly those of you who are actually Daily Kos readers, and not all of you are. Welcome, Rochester. If you're not yet reading Daily Kos, I insist that you do so, and will likely invade with a force of federal troops any time now to force you to do so. DailyKos.com, where you can find the written portion of our multimedia presentation. And, one more feature of the interlocking directorates that are Daily Kos, Netroots Radio, Daily Kos Radio, and Arliss Bunny's Hopping Mad program, which, by the way, I'll let her explain everything. But I think it's fair to say, could we say this? Well, you'll come on and correct me if you can. We'll get your radio start here on Daily Kos Radio. Kagro in the morning. Yes, I think so. All right. Well, a highly successful podcast all in its own right, and we'll find out about what's coming up. And the big surprise, we'll let you do the reveal, and we'll discuss a couple other things, too, because if you're going to make the trip all the way to Kagro in the Morning World Headquarters, which you're not, you're just using Skype, but if you're going to pretend and help us pretend, we might as well let you make it worth your while. Daily Kos Radio begins today. Of course, we are live. Kagro X. That's me. That's how you can reach me via email, for one thing, if you wanted to make comments that way. KAGROX@gmail.com. I think you can just give that out now. No big secret, and no harm done if we get weirdo mail from Russian bots. I guess it's not like my primary email or anything, but I guess it is for the most part. I probably do more traffic through that because I do so much stuff online. But then my real life one, where all the people who want to sell me goods and services send me junk mail, and I ignore that. I guess I would consider that my primary email. I have work to do in ignoring that junk. But you can also reach me via Twitter. And that's probably more likely to get read, too, by the way, at the same address, KAGROX. Don't ask what it means unless you want to ask me on Twitter, in which case, I don't know, maybe I should make that a pinned tweet. But KAGROX, that's that again, me, David Waldman, makes it official. Bill tells us all the way from Portland, Maine. Week 19, we're so done with you. See, we were on theme. We are done. The weekend, of course, is always an active news dump time. Friday, under most previous administrations, was a pretty good news dump time, too. It was usually something shocking that they would dump on us and count on the fact that most of us would sort of tune out for the weekend. Different motivation here under the Trump administration used to be when they would dump crazy stuff that Trump was doing. And we used to think, they were doing that on Friday because it's Shabbat and Jared Kushner, observant Orthodox Jew as he is, and Ivanka, his wife, of course, would take off for the weekend about, mid-afternoon probably on Friday, and all the crazy stuff could happen because they were the moderating forces inside the White House. We now know that that's A, no longer true, and B, it's increasingly looking like Jared Kushner was at the center of some of the craziest violations of norms, ethics, and laws, and maybe even the Constitution itself all along. Ivanka, of course, entirely ineffectual in her role as a moderating influence. I haven't seen actually anything accomplished whatsoever. Lots of things threatened and then overridden, and also becoming increasingly clear the sources for all of the tips that the two of them were moderating influences appear to have come either from them or from their PR people. And remember, of course, Kushner keeps a staff, which is unusual for a staffer at the White House, and so does Ivanka. And they have people. They had people call, I don't know who, newspaper people, and tell everybody they're the geniuses behind everything that's good and against everything that sucks, but they're not doing any good. Of course, Paris Climate Agreement withdrawal came through yesterday, despite the insistence of some portion of the PR-osphere that insisted that Ivanka was going to talk him out of it. That didn't happen and was never going to happen. So we'll catch up on that news and maybe we can throw a couple of pieces of esoterica in there too for good weekend conversation. I sometimes think we have to go to a 7-day format just to keep up with things, but there's no way that's going to happen because I'd die. Anyway, in addition to welcoming Arliss Bunny in a couple of minutes, I want to welcome our latest guest as well. If we're very quiet, maybe we can. I'm hearing it because I'm super sensitive to this stuff now. Do you hear it? Our welcome to our new guest, the Frigidaire brand, no endorsement deal that I know, the Frigidaire brand mini fridge, ladies and gentlemen. A round of applause. The Kagro in the Morning World Headquarters mini fridge saves me the trip of having to go up and down the stairs. We live in a townhouse, so the stairs are considerable. To get up and down the stairs to the spare fridge that we kept in the garage all these years, and it has helped us limp through the refrigerator-less period in which we're living. Still no repairs, of course. You all know when that's happening, or the next installment in our ongoing saga. But we finally gave up on having to buy ice every day. Although then we bought this mini fridge just to keep drinks and milk, and like the kids need ketchup like crazy, and I have to up and down these flights of stairs every time they decide they need more ketchup. Or one of them wants a toaster waffle in the morning that's in the freezer. It's crazy. So we have this nice new Frigidaire fridge, and that's going to save us a lot of trouble. But of course, it hums, and it's in here, and I hear it. And I don't know. I hope you don't, but I hope you. Well, you're probably sick of hearing about the refrigerator. You probably don't want to hear the refrigerator itself. Although we do have to include both sides of the story, and in fairness, we had to make a call to the refrigerator to see if it wanted to comment, and the original LG does not have anything to say. That did not return our calls for comment. But the Frigidaire wanted to chime in. Anyway, of course, I now realize we still need ice anyway, just to have ice cubes. So I'm stuck buying ice anyway. All right. Well, let's get on with the program. I'll bring Frigidaire. Arliss, hi. Chime in. Anyway, of course.
Hi, I'm sorry. I forgot to turn down my radio first.
Oh, that's okay. Well, I forgot to turn down my refrigerator, so we all have interference going on.
Congratulations on having at least a temporary, stand-in. We're also a 2-refrigerator family, but for a completely different reason. We have what we refer to as the human refrigerator, which is in the kitchen, downstairs, and then the bunny refrigerator, which is upstairs because 5 house rabbits require an enormous amount of greens.
Do you have to refrigerate carrots for rabbits or no?
Yes, I have a crisper drawer that's got full of mini carrots. Okay. They each get one mini carrot. No, Mercy gets half a mini carrot. She's on a diet, but everybody else gets one mini carrot in the evenings.
All right, everyone, please write that down. That'll be on the quiz later. I don't know why I'm obsessed about the refrigerator, but okay. It can really throw a monkey wrench in your life. And anyway, climate change, blah blah blah. Refrigerators, it's
that's
all
right.
The
there it goes. So yes, Kagro in the Morning did give me my. You absolutely did give me my quote unquote start in radio. I came on occasionally with you to be with explainers about various economic issues. Mm-hmm. And then I went from there to a regular spot on the after show.
Yes.
And that expanded from 1 day to 2 days. And that's where I quote unquote met Will McLeod, who's my, my podcasting partner on Hopping Mad. Mm-hmm. And Will and I we had Hopping Mad going for almost a year before we ever actually met in person.
Yeah, it happens that way, the virtual work environment, but it enables a lot of great work in the meantime. Yeah, essentially, and this can happen, by the way, for any of you interested in that. And even if we say things, if you don't necessarily love the show, but I don't know what you're doing here if you don't. But certainly, if we say something that sparks your interest, or maybe it's an area of personal expertise for you, or you just, hey, I got to have time and make a comment. Well, we'll discuss it later. I don't want to take away from time now, but I'll talk to you all again about how you can chime in, and it's not a major commitment. If you want to start a regular radio show, fantastic. But lots of ways to sort of get a foot in the door, and then if the bug bites you, well, podcasting opens up all kinds of opportunities. You don't have to wait for a radio station to hire you, because if you do, you're out of luck. It's not happening.
And
not here either.
Will and I are both looking for a third podcasting partner, because we both travel a great deal on business. So if we could have a third person that we can sort of mix and match with, then that is a little bit easier, I think, on all concerned, and we will miss fewer shows, basically. So that's kind of one of our objectives, is to find a third party. So if you are interested in having your say on Netroots Radio, but don't want to take on the burden of a full show, we are super happy to have you contact us and join the Hopping Mad team.
That is a great way to ease into things. I mean, a great middle step, or, it could actually even be your first step, and you just say, this either did or didn't work out, or I need more time, or I'll do both. But what a great way to get into the radio. If it's like calling a friend on the phone and have a conversation for an hour. And luckily for you at the moment, I guess until you're up and trained, the production would be in other hands. But great way to ease into I was going to say business, but it is what it is. We do this,
that's right.
And it has a schedule, and there's lots of accounts payable. And that's where the similarity ends.
That's right. Well, and we also, you've been talking a lot about your refrigerator lately, and I vividly remember your kitchen rehab as well. Yes, and, Greg's got his, doorbell. We're all doing this basically out of our homes or home office in my case. But, it's certainly a labor of love, but I think it's really important. I think this is how grassroots makes itself known.
Yeah.
We make ourselves known in the streets. We make ourselves known here. This is how this is part of how we resist.
Yeah. And not just the fact that we're sort of spreading around either the work or opening the door on radio so much as just in a more general sense. Hey, I heard someone I agreed with or maybe even disagreed with a little bit, but someone who just sounded like me or said interesting things, and now I'm interested and excited and want to do something more, whether it's a great deal or I just want to call my member of Congress or make a comment on a blog or write a diary. This is how it begins. Someone you didn't know before and didn't have any access to before through the magic of the internet comes into your home and makes you decide to do something more. That's activism.
Yeah. And when you're particularly if you're like, Driftglass and Blue Gal, with their show out of Illinois, or me here out of Indiana, if you're blue in a red state, it makes an enormous difference to me and I sit here in a tiny, tiny rural town in, a very, very red part of Indiana. It makes a big difference to me to be able to hear other people and just feel like I'm not alone. I mean, it is extremely encouraging. It's why I listen to in addition to all of the fabulous information I get from shows, from the podcasts I listen to, it's why I listen to so many podcasts, because I listen to about 6 hours of podcasting a day.
So yeah, it could be on in the background while you're working.
That's right.
And it is a great lifeline for people who otherwise either feel cut off and they know the people are out there, and blogs are a great release from that. But also, there's an element to hearing the voices that helps too.
Yeah.
Let's hear yours. As a matter of fact, first of all, I understand you were telling me you've got a big interview coming up, and that's later today.
Yes, we're doing the interview today, and it will broadcast on our show at 8 a.m. on Monday morning. We're your Monday morning lead-in. And on Monday morning, folks can tune in to Netroots Radio or hop on to Stitcher, iTunes, Google Play, or at our website, imhoppingmad.com, to hear our incredible interview with Carolyn Fiddler. Carolyn Fiddler is the brand new political director and senior communications advisor for Daily Kos. She's Marcos's newest hire, and she comes to Daily Kos. She's a real powerhouse and a real heavy hitter. She comes to Daily Kos she was the communications director at the Democratic Legislative Campaign Committee. So she's out of DC. And before that, she was with the American Federation of Teachers and with Media Matters for America. So this is somebody who has just amazing experience and tremendous depth and expertise in terms of state-level campaigns, which is, of course, where we as progressives have finally figured out that we need to turn and push hard.
Yes. The DLCC, Democratic Legislative Campaign Council or Committee, they're the ones in charge of the campaigns for state legislative offices, and an enormous black hole, really, for a lot of from DC's perspective, and yet so critically important to the majority of the law that controls your day-to-day life. And it's been difficult, and we haven't focused nearly enough on these legislative races, and it would be a really fantastic thing. It's a great mix, I think, between both to add Carolyn to the Daily Kos elections vertical that we've got that focuses so closely on races that you might otherwise miss and gets so granular, and it's going to be really interesting to see what sorts of things can happen combining those kind of analysts with that kind of strategist and the Daily Kos community's kind of grassroots, immediate turnaround in fundraising ability.
Right.
That will be fantastic.
And it's interesting because since I listen to so many sources of news and podcasting and that kind of thing, as opposed to watching things on television, I turn on my television for debates, and that pretty well sums up. Unlike you, I'm the opposite of you. That's basically the only thing I watch on television these days, and has been that way for several years. And so I bring everything in orally, and it is amazing to me the percentage of time, the increase in the number of essentially mentions in mainstream media of Daily Kos, and particularly, as you and Armando were discussing, particularly the elections team there, David Neer and his folks. And I think Carolyn that will be the next name you start hearing in the news coming out of Daily Kos, because she's well enough established, and she's extremely media savvy, and she's going to be an enormous asset to the Daily Kos team. So her first day is this coming Monday, the 5th, and it's the perfect day for us to release this interview because we can be part of the Daily Kos celebration in bringing the fabulous Carolyn Fiddler on board.
Yeah, that's going to be great. I know that in I guess what was the official release announcing the hire, that they mentioned that she would be anchoring a Daily Kos presence in D.C., so I'd like to find out more about that.
Yeah.
I'm here, and I think if she can get them to outfit a physical office, I don't know that that's really what's going to happen, but if that ever happens, we need a studio in there. And it should be in suburban Virginia, frankly, so that I can reach it a lot easier. And then we can broadcast out of there, and then we can have her in to give you legislative race updates every day that she wanders around the studios. And it'd be much more convenient, of course, if they moved out here. Really, honestly, my house would be a great place to have that. And if we bought an office building, an entire office building. Would be terrific. We're, no plans to do that, but you can encourage her to do that anyway.
Well, and Will's there too. Will's in DC too. So,
see, we really should coalesce.
That's right. Daily Kos, Fluffy Media, Hopping Mad Media, joint venture. Laughably.
We should, we should get together in some physical space somewhere, because there's a few of us. And there have been people moving in and out of DC, of course, a magnet for that. So it'll always be useful. I mean, it makes, it's not like it doesn't make any sense to have a permanent fixture here. But, we're not quite at that stage, I don't think. It's still a blog, for God's sake. So, all right. Well, and remind everybody, on Monday, 8 a.m. Eastern time is when I'm Hopping Mad runs, but they can catch the podcasts at any time on your website.
Right. On our website, which is imhoppingmad.com. Or on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play, and a number of other podcasting, platforms. And Will and I'll just be kind of going over. This will be a little bit different show in that we're just going to kind of update people on both why we were on hiatus for so long, but also we're making some changes to the show. And so we'll be talking about that as well, to simplify some things and to make our lives a little bit more sane, because we had created things you learn as you go along in this podcasting venture. We had created it for ourselves a show that was extremely, that was requiring a huge amount of our time. Mm-hmm. We were trying to pack an enormous amount of information into a tiny amount of time. And by doing that, by having to pull all that information together and then edit the daylights out of it so that we could fit it into the appropriate time blocks, we were killing ourselves. So, we were literally going in editing and taking out portions of seconds between words.
Yes, I've done that. So in the beginning, anyway.
It takes forever, right? Because you have to get down to that 58, the magic 58 minutes. And so in order to get to the magic 58, we were just doing crazy stuff. So we're changing up our format a little bit and including some fun things that we had mentioned before on the show, but we're doing for real now. For instance, the Lying Liar Lie of the Week segment will be part of our process, and we'll be encouraging people to submit what they think is the biggest lie of the week, because apparently that is the theme of our new administration. That and, of course, the other primary theme and objective of the Trump administration, which is to cede world leadership to China and Russia.
Yeah, well, to anybody who'll take it, I guess. But do you think, I know you sent me this article here from The Guardian. Yeah. I've got it up here. China sees an opportunity to lead as Trump withdraws from Paris, but will it? And over the past couple of days, we've mentioned that perhaps it's now Angela Merkel who takes over the leadership of the free world. But, of course, there's more to the world than just the free world, and it may be the better part of the world. And so who leads that will be important. I guess it's certainly clear that Trump intends to cede leadership. And I guess our lead-in question for this from me is, does he care, or do we think he cares who he's ceding it to, or does he just not want it at all, or is it just he doesn't understand that what he's doing would cede leadership? He probably thinks he's being a strong leader, but I can't imagine he believes he's leading the world. Although, he's Donald Trump, so he probably does believe he's leading the world.
I'm pretty sure he thinks he's leading the universe, but
very likely.
But I think what has happened is that whoever the influencers are who are themselves influenced by Russia, whether or not they realize they are influenced by Russia, I do think there's some question as to whether his people are bright enough to know they're actually traitors. You know, you do have to have some level of self-awareness to know that. To know that you're a traitor. I mean, you can be a traitor without knowing that you are a traitor.
I would imagine most people have pretty strong built-in defenses to admitting that they are traitors. So it's going to take an awful lot to get them to say, wow, this might be treason. I should think about this.
And there is a point in time at which, when I watch his people be stupid over and over again, there's a point in time at which you have to say to yourself, I'm not really sure. I mean, clearly some of these people know they're on, you know, either thin ice or already through the ice, but there, you know, Kushner, do you really, I'm not at all positive he has any clue. I kind of think he's just stupid enough to be in way, way over his head and so invested only in his own greed and personal gain that he really colors everything with that. And of course, that's exactly what the Russians are looking for when they're looking for, you know, an influence, you know, someone to influence. That's exactly the handle that they, you know, by which they carry away the pot. So
that's important to remember.
Yeah. So no, I think Trump, I don't think he purposely in his head thinks I'm going to cede leadership of the world to Russia and China. I don't think he thinks that. I think he thinks he is the leader of the free world. And of course, they're telling him, yes, you are the leader of the free world, Donald. You know, have another bowl of ice cream. But the reality is that is what, you know, what is happening. And, you know, Russia is going to lead with, you know, by fear, like they basically always have. And China is going to be much, much more sophisticated about it. They're playing the long, long game, which is classic of China. You know, everybody's playing true to form. It's not like, you know, we're the only ones that are outside our wheelhouse. They're all playing true to form. And President Xi of China is, who is in his own, you know, facing his own internal political struggles, is looking really to look like a world leader. And it is important to him to look like China is where the world turns when they start to feel insecure because Trump is upending the economy of the planet. And if China can maintain a steady hand and be really aggressive about things like the climate accords, the Paris climate accords, then I think that China really is making a pretty legit play to step up. And, you know, they're looking to do things like spend $280 billion by 2020 on renewables. They think they're going to create 13 million jobs doing that. And of course, Trump is exactly, you know, Trump using industry generated, you know, fake statistics basically, thinks that we're going to bring jobs back to coal by getting out of Paris, which completely ignores the fact that Paris, one way or the other, first of all, it's non-enforceable. It's an accord. It isn't a treaty and it isn't legally enforceable. But secondly, it completely ignores the fact that we were getting out of coal a long time before this happened. A long time before Paris, a long time before all of it, because coal is extremely expensive to produce. And things like natural gas, which we're not, you know, overly thrilled about, but renewables in particular are becoming much, much more cost efficient. And the carbon emissions in the U.S. fell by 12% in the last decade while the economy grew. And under the Obama administration, we added 11.3 million jobs. Under the Bush administration, we added just over 2 million jobs. So you tell me which of those two was a climate denying president and which of those two supported climate, a reduction in emissions and, acting in accord with Paris. And Trump, here's my prediction. And I bet you a carrot on this.
Okay.
Trump.
A whole big one.
Will next month, when the May or when the June unemployment numbers are announced in July, Trump will take credit for any improvement in the jobs numbers and attribute it to us getting out of Paris.
Yes, I'm certain. You're right.
So you're not going to take my carrot bet?
Well, I mean, you're going to have a hard time finding somebody who's going to cover that bet. Although you'll have to make the odds, I guess, better. But that's
better than a carrot.
Hard to deny.
Come on,
there are some things, but it's impossible to believe. Well, certainly, I mean, we've seen him claim credit for all sorts of things, including, I think, eventually when even December unemployment numbers came out, he was saying, I was inaugurated in January, and everybody knew that I was coming in. They were hiring people on the basis of the optimism that I was bringing into Washington. So whatever happens, and of course anything that happens that's bad, well, that's obviously Obama or possibly even Bill Clinton's fault. It goes all the way back. So this is the game that they play all the time. But I'm sure that they'll point to any good news and say this is because of getting out of Paris, even though it couldn't possibly have anything to do with it, not only because of the time frame, but because there was nothing about the Paris Accords that would have any impact on these things.
Well,
and I don't know.
That it propagates exactly what you just said, and what, of course, is what Trump said. Propagates that notion that employers hire based on anticipated demand and based upon quote unquote optimism, or based upon having more money to spend, like getting a tax break. Employers never hire for those reasons. Not ever. Employers hire for one reason and one reason only, because they absolutely cannot afford not to hire that person.
It's the last thing that they want to do with their capital.
That's right.
Happens. I mean, it's the lowest choice of ways to, and it's not even necessarily much of an investment, but they'll only do it if there was really going to be a return, obviously. But they'll try anything other than hiring a human being before they finally give in and do something like that. It's one of the, most pervasive business myths, and I guess business administration myths. I blame the MBA programs for this, among other things. The idea that putting more capital in the hands of anyone, whether they're currently employers or they're just wealthy leisure class, that they will invest it in things that create jobs. It's certainly not. I mean, I guess that would be an interesting interview. Not that the facts would change anybody's mind, but it would just be great to interview people who are wealthy leisure class investors and say, when you've been making decisions about where to invest your money, have you ever even asked how many jobs someone anticipates creating in the next year or so before you bought in or bought shares or invested or whatever, and whatever vehicle you use to invest? Because typically, even if there is an answer to that, and sometimes a really savvy investor will say, yes, I have looked at that, or we've looked at their plans. And typically, now if somebody's really going to be honest, they'll say if it involves a significant number of human resources additions, if you're going to hire a bunch of people, that's usually a sign that I don't want to be a part of it. Or maybe it happens more often in reverse. Like if you have massive layoffs planned, now I want to, got to get a share of that, because that's usually, downsizing is usually a pretty good indication that there's going to be a pretty sweet payoff somewhere up the ladder later on. Less money being spent on little people, and that means less capital from the company going out the door to people who aren't you.
Right.
That's a danger sign. Watching investment being planned on giving the company's money away to other people is a sign to get out. or at least not get in. So I don't know where, I mean, other than the MBA programs and conservative talk circles where it's imperative that people come away with the belief that tax cuts are good because, well, why should we tell people they're good? They're really not. It gives money away to the rich. It doesn't make any sense. It's not an investment. Well, you could tell people it creates jobs because reasons.
Well,
it doesn't.
It is the one time that employers talk about, if I get this money, it will create this many jobs. And this is really, really consistent across big businesses, across small businesses, is when we are talking to our local municipalities and we want a tax break, we want a grant, we want in other words, when we're trying to tap into local money.
Yeah. Whether there's cash involved or not, right? Land use easements,
yes,
rezoning,
exactly.
Anything you want to favor from the government, whether it's cash or something else, you say, well, I'm creating jobs with it. And even if you're not, the local politicians are appreciative of the ability to say, well, I can't explain this giveaway otherwise, but if you tell me you're creating 1,000 jobs, that'll go in the first line of the press release, and no one will call my office and complain, or very few people will. And if they do, I'll say, jobs.
Exactly.
That's what I need that for. I need it. I need the excuse. Whether the jobs come or not, Carrier still giving away its jobs despite the intervention. It doesn't change. But okay, well, how did we get here? I forget.
Well, we were talking about, initially about China and them picking up the leadership of the world economy. And while you were talking about Angela Merkel, and she of course is facing an election this year as well. So she's, battling this year too. But I think all of what's happened with France and with Theresa May and Brexit and the mess there and with Trump, I have a hard time believing Germans are going to make a switch. I think they're going to be proud to be backing the leader of the free world.
Yeah.
And I think that in a lot of politics, essentially, the world is going to be turning to her. And in terms of economy, the world is going to be turning to President Xi of China. And I think it's going to be that way until we fix this nightmare that is in Washington right now. And it's going to affect, it is a permanent change. Yes. In other words, just getting rid of Trump or Trump and Pence or whatever, President Hatch, if we were to get to that insane point,
yes,
just getting there does not restore faith in the United States. We have broken faith with the world. Not just because we broke Paris, because we broke actual faith with them by breaking our word on the Paris Accord, but because of the way we're handling Russia. And that, if you don't think that doesn't affect every company in Europe and they aren't all, beyond their ability to speak about it rationally, it is, the Russians have been flying along and over the border of bordering nations to test their defenses all along the border with NATO countries for 2 years now, almost 3 years now. And with the change in Turkey, which has been incredibly effective, and Turkey is the largest army in NATO.
That's a good point. That's not one that's been raised.
Or I'm sorry, second largest army in NATO behind the U.S., but it's the U.S. and then Turkey.
Yeah, that's rarely mentioned.
Yeah.
And speaking of Turkey, again, Sarah Palin was right. So not only she was wrong about the turkeys, but correct about Russia, as it turns out. Putin rearing his head here and there, and here we all thought she was crazy.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Will and I have been, and Will in particular, have been squeaking about this for a long time, and over and over on the show, Will has talked about, well before the election, well before, in fact, the primary, Will was talking about the increased level of aggression in Russia. And, analysts the world over have been watching this. So this breaking with our allies, which is, of course, the dream of the Russians. This is what Vladimir Putin falls asleep at night, hoping against hope for when he wishes over, blows out the candles on his birthday cake. He hopes for a day like yesterday.
Yeah.
And, and he hopes for a day when we give back what we took away from them for no gains whatsoever. Because this piece of property that they're giving us in St. Petersburg, that's,
Oh, did we get I didn't realize we even got a token, but okay.
Yeah, it's a token that we neither want nor need.
What is it?
It's a piece of property for a consulate in St. Petersburg. We wanted to build a new consulate in St. Petersburg. We wanted a piece of property to put it on. We asked for a particular authorization to buy this particular piece of property, and the Russians had been saying no. And suddenly, as part of this, give us back the spy complexes in the U.S., suddenly they're saying, well, maybe we'll give you back that piece of property in St. Petersburg. Not enough. It's not enough.
Well, it's nothing as a piece of property.
Yeah.
If we allowed to build on it, maybe. I mean, I suppose they could still say, well, sure, we'll give you this access to this property, and then just give us bureaucratic nightmares that might even just eventually lead to not even building the thing. But even if we do, so it's a consulate. Big deal. Thank you. We had one. Well, now we have a nicer one. This is like a major deal, this compound we're giving back to them. What a strange... Well, the whole thing is kind of weird. I did want to comment also, you mentioned that this is a permanent change to America's stature in the world, and I kind of, as I was thinking about it, not only even if we get to manage to impeach our way to a President Hatch or anything else, but even if in the next election we were to sweep out the Republicans and replace them all with Democrats, it's not certain that this is damage that can be repaired, because the flurry of activity, such as it's been in the first 100 and whatever days of the Trump administration, has demonstrated to the rest of the world that America no longer has any permanent sense of itself even, and that the next Democratic administration that might reestablish trust with the world, in about 3 years, the world starts getting nervous again, because all of this can be undone with the pen of the next nutball America elects. And who knows who that could be, given that they elected Trump, especially if he makes it all the way through the 4 years of his term. The rest of the world will be so nervous about American elections. And by the way, I guess at that point you start to wonder, is it a smart play, if you are China and the leader of the rest of the world, to not play in the election manipulation game in 2020? Well, there's no punishment for it for the Russians. Why don't we get in on this?
How do you know that they weren't playing in the Montana election we just had?
Well, we don't.
In other words, how do we know that the PACs that poured money in weren't backed by Russian and Chinese money? If I'm China, I'm sure as hell playing.
Yeah, well, I would get in now at this point. And there was, I didn't hear much about the Montana angle on it, but there's certainly, as part of the ongoing Russia investigation, lots of probing now of whether or not Russians, and I don't see why they wouldn't have, or really even legally why they couldn't have, in terms of actual enforcement, that they spent quite a lot of money on some of these targeted Facebook ads that people are so concerned about, and may have had this undue influence. And as spooky as it is to think about the way those ads were targeted, there's certainly from the Facebook perspective nothing untoward, nothing we've set down a decision about, legally speaking, about whether or not these things can or should be targeted this way, or whether dark posts are unethical in some way. But all of this, I don't think there's any law against Facebook accepting money from Russian companies for ads. And so that's sort of a weird backdoor into, we certainly ordinarily ban foreign entities and corporations from making these kinds of in-kind or coordinated contributions to our elections campaigns. But I guess if you do it through a third party, and hey, it's Facebook, and Facebook is a global phenomenon, and we want to advertise, and besides which, you don't even really have jurisdiction over us. So even if it is illegal in the United States, we don't care. We're not going there. So the permanence is not only that everybody else is going to want to get in the game now and has seen that there's no punishment for doing so, but there's no reason to believe that anything that a normal administration that might come afterwards is able to do is going to be permanent either. They're going to come in and it doesn't even matter whether it works legally. Who cares? We'll come in, we'll just issue executive orders that say that thing sucks and we're getting rid of it, and it's going to be 100 days before we find out whether that's going to stick or not, but it'll all be undone. And that's got to be nerve-wracking for the rest of the world. And another thing that you mentioned, the European business community being concerned about Russia, not only their physical intrusions into the airspace and physical space, and in the case of others, just rolling in there with troops. That's not only going to be a concern for them, but just I'm thinking even for normal further out west in Europe, where they might not necessarily be concerned, top of mind with an actual Russian invasion of troops. It's got to be worrisome the way they run their oligarchy and their business connections and their mobsterism. How do Western democracies and capitalist democracies, where, thankfully things are a little bit different in Europe than they are in the United States in terms of regulation of business. But here, we've succumbed pretty quickly. The dollar rules everything, and we mean for it to rule everything. And we forget that a lot of these dollars can be illegitimate. How do we resist a wave of investment that seems like, how can you walk away from billions of dollars of investment from quote unquote investors who don't seem to particularly care about, in some cases, even having a return on that investment, although I'm sure they'll begin to demand it, but might not, European and American businesses find it irresistible. They can't, our shareholders won't let us walk away from a multi-billion-dollar investment from oligarch and mob-controlled Russian entities, and, forget taking over the government, forget manipulating elections. If we can run your corporations through shell ownership, offshore ownership, LLCs, what have you, we can do as much, if not more damage, perhaps, than actually running your governments. But it should certainly help to run the governments as well.
Well, and when we talk about, Citizens United, getting rid of Citizens United and reversing it as being the, kind of the be-all, end-all, we're not even close. We're not even in the universe of everything that needs to be fixed in order to make sure that our elections are free and fair. And I think the only way we get to free and fair elections is if they're federally funded and if they're internationally monitored. And I don't know anymore. I don't know any other way, because capitalism has, in many ways in this country, because of our paranoia about regulation and our imaginary fear that regulation is what's holding back, is what's preventing companies from creating jobs, which is certainly a fear that has been marshaled out of nowhere by the, GOP over the past couple of decades, but also our completely irrational fear of debt and deficit, which is again a fear that has been marshaled out of nowhere by the GOP over the last couple of decades, ever since Reagan. And, when Nixon pulled us out of when Nixon pulled us off the gold standard, he had at least a cursory understanding of what it means to have a fiat currency. And nobody since that time has had that same understanding, even though chairmen of the Federal Reserve, people like Alan Greenspan, have sat in Congress my absolute favorite YouTube video of all time is when Paul Ryan, as a young congressman, is trying to pin down Alan Greenspan and say, but yeah, don't we have to cut Social Security? You know, this is Paul Ryan around a beer keg, only he's getting to ask his question of Alan Greenspan. And he's saying, don't we have to cut back on Social Security in order to prevent the government from spiraling into a debt from which we cannot come back? And Greenspan basically tells him in so many words, how would the U.S. government go broke? We own the printing press. You know, we can't go broke. We own the printing press.
Yeah.
And
I'm sure
and plenty of, you know, domestic and international capacity to accept dollars. So we're, you know, there is no reason why we can't, you know, afford Social Security indefinitely. And he explains that, of course, in his own very obtuse and dense terminology. But you see this look on Paul Ryan's face as he looks like he just smelled something, like he just realized he stepped in the dog poop on the sidewalk and now he's got to wipe it off on the grass, you know, on the lawn next to him. He has that look on his face because Greenspan is absolutely schooling him. And it's not like Alan Greenspan and I are on the same side of basically anything, but right. Alan Greenspan certainly understands how money works. And that over and over and over, Fed chairman will say how money works and then both A, not operate necessarily on those principles 100% of the time, and B, not keep saying it loudly and clearly to Congress so that they learn something from it, is enormously frustrating. And that's how I got into podcasting in the first place, to bring this back to where we started. Because when I first read about modern monetary theory, it became clear to me that the progressive movement needs to school ourselves on how money works and why it is no longer acceptable and never has been to have somebody say to us, we cannot afford that. And that, you know, as a government, as a federal government, we cannot afford that. The federal government is entirely different than states and, you know, and individuals and companies. States, individuals, companies, they all have to live on a budget. No question, because they're not issuers of currency, but the U.S. is the issuer of the currency, the strongest currency in the world. We can make our own rules there, and we don't. And progressives need to wrap their head around modern monetary theory because it is the way out for us. And it allows us to answer a lot of questions that have responses to a lot of the neoliberal, you know, conservative crap that we've been sold for a long time. So we've now closed the circle.
Well, for those who might be new to the program too, this would be a good opportunity to tell everybody if there was a way for people to simply understand or pick up a quick understanding in simple terms of modern monetary theory, and read about it in an afternoon and understand it. What do you think that would look like?
I think you would go to Amazon and purchase the download for the Smart Bunny's Guide to Debt, Deficit, and Austerity by Arliss Bunny. Yes. There are a lot of really good, serious explanations of MMT that are out there now, but my little quick explainer is the shortest, definitely the funniest, and the fastest way to onboard the basic principles of MMT.
Possibly the cheapest as well.
Pardon?
Possibly the cheapest as well.
Yes, possibly the cheapest as well, because I have made an effort to keep that price point way down. But what's interesting to me is that there are economics professors that are using the Smart Bunny's Guide as the initial text in some economics classes at universities, and wow. I know this because they've written to me. And it continues to sell, you know, to perk along and sell fairly solidly. So it is, it's kind of fun to have that out there in the world, but for people who want to try to understand why I keep talking about modern monetary theory and why, if you follow me on Twitter at Arliss Bunny, why I keep pushing MMT there as well so much is because we keep allowing ourselves to be backed into this we can't afford it corner every time we turn around. And it's simply a false narrative. It's been a false narrative for a long time. And since we are going through this huge shakeup about, and really talking about a lot of our core principles as progressives and what matters to us and what are going to be our priorities in the future, I think this is a good time to start really, really, really getting serious about how we talk about money and budgets and deficit and austerity and explain that we do indeed have the answer. And it's not like we invented it out of nowhere. It's actually how the Federal Reserve works. It's how modern money works. We're just saying, notice how it works. In other words, nobody has to prove modern monetary theory. It's not a theory in the same way that Keynesian macroeconomics is a theory. It's not a theory. It's actually how it works. It is the accounting on the books. It's a physical thing.
Maybe maybe it calls for a framing change, and instead of MMT, MMP, modern monetary practice.
Well, that's a good suggestion. We more and more modern money MMT people are talking about it just in terms of modern money. They're just leaving the theory off the end, and that it is indeed fiat currency is modern money.
That's hey, we ought to start an economics magazine as well, a popular news weekly, Modern Money. That would be a great way to seep into. You'd probably end up seeping into Wall Street without their knowing it. Too, just purely from the title. And if you edit it in a certain way. Now, I'm hatching a much bigger project here all of a sudden, but it occurs to me when you mentioned that they were using the book in economics. Was it economics or business courses?
Economics.
Or economics courses. If we could get the business people to do it, that would be something.
That would be miraculous.
This reminds me that, was it last Friday, the Friday before? I can't recall, but I spent so much time discussing the all the interlocking conservative family foundation philanthropies, as they like to call them, philanthropies, that have funded so many university chairs and programs around the country, and an enormous amount, really the vast majority of colleges and universities around the country getting at least some money for sponsorship of lecture series, of chairs, permanent chairs and professorships at the universities, and they're teaching these topics. And by the way, in many cases they don't mandate anything, but they maybe make suggestions about portions of the curriculum. But this is sort of talk about your low budget method of counteracting that, and we haven't had nearly the influence. Of course, they're spending millions of dollars to do this, but it's had a tremendous impact. I keep complaining about, all the MBA programs, they teach this horrible upside down theory in a couple of areas. And one, it's not an accident. Two, it's a well-funded non-accident. But the idea of it is, and it also goes back to something that I guess if you've ever heard of it, then it'll ring the bell for you. But the Powell memo, that is sort of the genesis of the modern movement conservative theory about how to change minds broadly and forever about how to think about economics. And it's had this tremendous impact. And you go to school and take a business course or an economics course, and you learn this kind of economics and this kind of business administration. And it's presented as politically neutral, that this is just the way it is. And you go out into the world thinking that. And I mean, it can be done from any perspective, but the idea that you'd be able to make inroads in economics and teach modern monetary theory because you've done it in an entertaining way, now people are learning it from a progressive standpoint, though it doesn't necessarily, I don't know, it doesn't say anywhere in the book.
No, it could absolutely be. In fact, if conservatives would just adopt it, they would discover that it's even better for them than the neoliberal bandwagon that they've been on for such a long time, because one of the things that MMT says is that, there are two ways to drive, essentially jobs and economic activity, and that is by the federal government spending new money into the economy, or by the federal government not taking taxes out of the economy. Progressives, of course, are on the side of let's spend new money into the economy, but it's equally appropriate for conservatives to be on the side of let's not take taxes out of the economy. And of course they are. Their problem right now is they're at the upper end of the scale. And really, it is possible to run this economy and to grow this economy if we completely wipe out the income tax. Just get rid of it.
Well, I think they would be enthused about that.
They might be, but you haven't heard them propose that, have you? Because that benefits you and me. It doesn't actually benefit, it doesn't actually increase the gap that's so very important to them. It doesn't increase inequality. It doesn't get them toward their, white cis male world. It doesn't give them the kind of power they're looking for. It puts power back into our hands, economic power. And so what MMT says is that there are two reasons to have taxes. Taxes drive money. In other words, the only reason that the dollar has any value, now we're getting into a long thing, but, and this is when I'm going to cut this off because otherwise I'll be here for the next 2 hours and you don't have that kind of time. But, the only reason that anybody accepts taxes, the only reason any U.S. merchant, anybody, anywhere accepts the U.S. dollar is because the U.S. federal government requires dollars in order to pay your taxes.
Yes.
Right? So taxes is what drives, the need to pay taxes is what drives a currency, a fiat currency, and, so modern monetary theory says, that's the reason to have taxes, because you can use it as leverage on the economy to speed it up or to slow it down. If you're, facing inflationary issues, but also taxes can be used in a punitive way. In other words, this increasing inequality gap, one of the ways to wipe that out or to, significantly diminish it is with taxes.
Yes. Well, that's that much they're aware of.
Yeah.
That's true.
That's what they're afraid of.
Yeah. And of course, then it immediately gets recast in terms of, that incentive or takes away all incentive for innovation or investment in anything. Why bother? Because I'm not going to be able to keep as much of it as I wanted. Of course, you still get more money in the end, unless we're doing the 100% thing.
Here's an interesting thing. First of all, do you do what you do for money?
No.
Yeah. Most people don't. And when there was a study, and I can't lay my paws on that right now, but there's a study where they went and talked to people who were on unemployment. They were on federal unemployment. And they asked them about, if you suddenly, had a job and had the money that you need for your family, what are the things that you most want? What are the things that you most feel that would add to your life? You know what the fifth thing on the list was?
No, but
money.
I guess money is, yeah, okay.
You know what the first thing was?
That I don't know.
Self-esteem.
There
are all four of the things above money were things like self-esteem, so that I can show so that I can, validate myself with my children, so I can validate myself with my neighbors, so I can make a contribution to my community. Those kinds of things all came above making money.
Well, that's what I keep. Actually, that's usually my number one appeal for asking for donations and sponsorships. Actually, and I thought it was. I mean, I was just sort of being comedic about it, but only because it's only funny because it's true, and I hadn't really thought about that. But I imagine that's pretty interesting. So, when are we going to see people insist that they need a capital gains tax cut so that they can help their fellow Americans raise their self-esteem? Is that too touchy-feely? They won't do that.
Yeah, that's too touchy-feely. They'll never do that. What you are seeing some, the modern money community is getting better about shaping their message. This talking about money in this way is really still relatively new, and the people who are at the core of this are getting better and better about shaping their messaging. And in fact, this year at University of Missouri at Kansas City, they're having the very first Modern Money International Conference. And so it's still really in its infancy in terms of how we talk about it. And it is a good time. It is the perfect time for progressives to, as I said earlier, to start learning about modern money, to get serious about modern money, and to stop allowing ourselves to be lied to about what the federal government can and cannot afford to do.
All right. Well, now we have a mission, and I'm putting together a whole plan in my head here. This is like the 19th plan in my head. It'll stay there, I'm sure, and keep me up at night as well. But now, yeah, I'm thinking about between the way conservatives fund college and university campus activity as a method of getting their preferred worldview taught to the next generation and the generation after that, the inroads you've made in economics classes, and a couple of other things, including another recurring theme on the show, the demise of the Democratic Study Group, the original Democratic Study Group that succeeded for decades in educating members of Congress and their staffs about pending legislation and policy issues from a explicitly progressive standpoint, but still became the standard even in a number of Republican offices for years about just how to think about policy approaches, because it was the best information regularly provided and steadily underwritten, and it just occupied this space. This is it's a plan. It's a plan to take over the world, and needs some funding and backing and organization and thought.
Well, the good news is that the next generation of policymakers are listening to podcasts.
True also.
The podcasting is exploding because this is where millennials and, younger generations are turning for their information, because they simply don't trust mainstream media anymore. It has proven itself to be untrustworthy, and they don't trust it. Accordingly, they don't trust it. So they are choosing their sources of information, and podcasts are exploding and a massively growing area for that reason. So we are, you and I and, everybody who is pounding so hard, pounding our heads against the wall so hard in podcasting right now, we at least are in the growth part of the market.
That's the place to be. All right. Well, now I knew this would end with us as leaders of the free world.
So I will let you go. Yes.
I better get to work.
Yes, as a voice for Rabbit America, I want to say thank you for having me on and for helping me to remind people that Hopping Mad is coming back on Monday. So Will and I are both super excited about it. We're thrilled to have Carolyn Fiddler on, and even more thrilled that we will be hearing her voice through Daily Kos for the foreseeable future.
All right. This will be fantastic. I'm looking forward to that. I knew there was something we needed to get back to, too. Also, thanks so much as it happens, you've carried us through the first hour of the show, and I always appreciate that, especially on a Friday. Thanks, Arliss.
Take care.
You
Any
do
carrots.
The same. Thanks. And to you too. I always forget to use that as a greeting with you. All right, take care, and we'll remind everybody, and especially those new listeners in Rochester. I'm really paying attention to you there in Rochester. You see, we're a good addition to any progressive lineup, or for that matter, a good addition to any Republican conservative lineup, and we're better than that, obviously. So you should add us to your local radio station, and perhaps, by the way, it would be fun for you if you're listening, even if you're listening via podcast, to see about adding the Kagro in the Morning show to the latest or whatever existing progressive lineup there may be in your city, or even if there isn't one. I mean, what the hell, right? Just let conservatives start their day being furious at listening to progressives. I don't see any harm in that, especially as we won't take their phone calls anyway. So who cares? But thanks first of all, to those of you who are listening perhaps for the first time or one of the first few times in Rochester. I guess I wanted to bring that up again because to date we have not been on Mondays on our new Rochester affiliate, and that changes now that the calendar has flipped over to June, and so you'll be hearing us 5 days a week there, and on Monday will be our first Monday broadcast there in Rochester, so we're glad to have that. And a good reminder, before we're on at 9 o'clock, if you want to catch the interview with Carolyn Fiddler live the first time it airs, that would be Monday at 8, and that's, of course, Eastern Time. I'm speaking to my friends in Rochester, right? So everything can be in Eastern Time. The rest of you calculate accordingly. Netroots Radio is where you'll find that. It won't be on in Rochester. Unfortunately, I don't think that they're taking the entire Netroots broadcasting day, though I suggest that they do that. And if you want to hear the interview when it airs, remember to tune in then to netrootsradio.com at 8 a.m. and you'll be able to stream it directly. And then if you just keep it on all day long, as you should anyway, you'll hear us next. But if you like to turn over to the Rochester station and listen in that way, well, of course, we invite you to continue doing that. But you might as well keep Netroots Radio on all day long. I always recommend that it happen. But if you're able to flip on WRFZ 106.3 FM in Rochester Free Radio, then we invite you to do that. And if you happen not to be able to listen in live as they broadcast it for the first time on Monday, or rather, if you can't tune in to I'm Hopping Mad because it's not on Rochester Radio, but should be, then remember Netroots Radio, an easy way to do it. So just tune in and be ready to do that every Monday from here on in, if you ask me. And if you're thinking about getting into the podcasting game, and we can't yet call it a business, unless more of you... All right, well, we'll get to the fundraising pitch at some point soon, but... Seriously, if you're interested in jumping in, well, first of all, if you just want to dip a toe in the water, we do frequently solicit contributions from those of you who are listening, even if it's just as simple as, hey, there's an article, either something that's happening locally or something that's happening globally, but we just don't think you've gotten to, or maybe you missed the point when you did get to it, or I'd like to add to that point. Pick up your smartphone and pick up your article and read it. Record yourself reading it as though you are here on the radio as our guest, because we will make you our guest, and send me the file. We try to keep the segments relatively short, 5 minutes, a little bit more, sometimes can run over. That makes it easy. But record it on your, if you've got a better setup at home with a computer and a nice microphone, go ahead and do it. But a smartphone will do. Read it into your smartphone. Tell me where the article's from. Give us the citation. Email it to me. Attach it as a file. Make it an MP3 file, and we can plug it in and run it here. Then include the link to the article that you've read, and we'll be happy to feature it on the show. And that's an easy way to get in, particularly if you're thinking about doing something more regular, and but you think real life might interfere from time to time. 5 minutes, once a week, once every 2 weeks, once a month. We won't even hold you to a schedule. Once and never again. It'll be okay. If you're thinking of something more regular, then sure, try and make it a regular feature. We don't mind. We enjoy having, it's like time off here. And we enjoy having it, and it's really great to be able to kind of lend you the microphone. Because it takes some work to build to where we are, and we're still relatively small. But as I mentioned yesterday, 106,000 downloads of the podcast last month. That's pretty good. That's on average averages over 4,500 downloads per show, although it's not necessarily per show because some people download back episodes, etc. But that's what it comes out to. We ran 23 original shows in May, and we had 106,000 downloads. So, like I said, just about 4,600 plus downloads per show if you do it on that basis. But you know, we don't do commercials. You may have noticed. It's not that we wouldn't. We'd take commercials. We'd take the commercial sponsorship, and we'd interrupt your listening pleasure, I'm sure, to advertise products, and we have in the past. And usually we try and keep it within a progressive community. But hey, I guess there are some we would reject. But at this point, we're allowed to. But yeah, we don't. We operate on the donations. And I mean, there's operations costs here, and there's just time costs here. This eats up the majority of the day, and as we've said in the past, and as Arliss pointed out, it's worth considerable amount of something to us to be able to look the family in the eye and say, this time that I spend away from you, this time that I spend, even if you're home on vacation or on spring break or whatever, that I spend here from 9 to 11 at the radio, and from 8 to 9 getting ready to go on the radio, to the extent that I do that, and then spend from 11 to 1 or 2 o'clock getting things done in post-production and preparing the recordings for upload for our podcast distribution, and coordinating with Scott to get the summaries done, and then putting those up, and then remembering to put up a promotional post for the mornings every weekday morning to remind everybody that our program is coming on. It eats up a significant portion of the day. And when I tell the kids I'm doing that, or tell my wife I'm doing that, and the kids don't usually say this, but the wife sometimes will, and will, at least will imply it and say, and you're doing this in exchange for what portion of the children's college education? And I say 0. That's tough to swallow when we're running the budget in the household. And so it would be very nice if we could actually make a serious endeavor of this. And it would also be nice, of course, if we could, for instance, send more money to Scott Anderson every time he puts together one of these fantastic summaries. And he does these, most cases, 5 days a week, for next to nothing, as we all do from time to time. But if we could make this a going concern, that would be pretty serious, right? How do we do that? In our case, that's where it's up to you. And we collect the funding for that in the main through our Patreon.com account, an opportunity for people to donate monthly, and it doesn't have to be a great deal if we're all pitching in. It can be next to nothing if we're all pitching in. At patreon.com/KagroX, because that's the wacky name I use, and it's short, and it's good for Twitter, and it's good for Patreon too. And people sign up $5 a month, $10 a month, more, it happens. And as I put it, like I said, we did 23 original shows last month. If you would throw $1 into a guitar case for 5 minutes of great guitar playing on a street corner, might we ask that you do the same for 2 hours of good entertainment each day? And if you did it each day, why, that would actually be an awful lot of money. If you were willing to part with $1 or 99 cents for a dumb app or something like that, right? And you did it each day, that's 5 shows a week, $23 last month. If we could only do it in micropayments and say, if you'd put 99 cents every time you download, it would add up. It's true. But I don't know. I like to think that it's worth the money. I certainly like to think that it's worth the investment. I certainly like to think that you're not getting exactly the same kind of information and a little bit of entertainment too along the way anywhere else. Would you part with $1? Would you part with 50 cents? Would you give up a can of Diet Coke from an extraordinarily cheap vending machine? I can't find them for 50 cents anyway, anywhere else. $1 at a time, $23 last month. I mean, when you think about it and you sign up for one of these Patreon things, well, I don't know, how much am I, every month? I mean, that adds up. $25? $1 at a time, it doesn't seem so bad, right? $25 a month, well, that's a considerable amount of money. Well, what about if you cut it in half? What about if you did it at $10, 10 a month? That's still monthly. You everybody wants to think it through, right? 12 months in a year, $120? Really? I mean, that seems like a high price tag. But it doesn't seem really all that much if you think about it in terms of 50 cents to hear this program. 25 cents an hour. That's lower than minimum wage, even in some of the worst places. People do make less in the world, but okay. Never mind. Now I'm depressing myself. But as it happens, it's very important that this happen. And as we looked at the numbers from last month, 106,000 downloads, 4,600 per show. And then we look at our numbers for Patreon. And if you happen to wander by, I wondered about this. If you wander by the patreon.com/KagroX page, you'll see that, let's do it now. You'll see that we have 110 patrons, and that is nothing to sneeze at. And you may see it and say, well, at 110 patrons, contributing altogether $817 per month, and that's every month. That's actually a considerable amount of money. That's a lot, but that's all there is. That's what you get for spending your day from 8 o'clock to 3 o'clock in the afternoon engaged in this business. And frankly, well, it's not enough, and it causes me, it's the main driver of saying to the family, or to my wife as it happens, when we discuss this stuff, there's not much money for college in that. Thankfully, there's money for college elsewhere. She works, that's true, and I do other work besides this, but it takes an awful lot of my day, to make up for the time of day that I put into this. So, plus, of course, we'd love to be able to professionalize operations to the extent that we can, pay people who contribute, and generally have some sense that this is something that could continue in the future. Were there some other demand on my time, which is not exactly certain at this point. So at 110 patrons, which is a lot, I wondered whether people look at it and say they don't need any more. Really, that's a lot of people and a lot of money. The money you can figure out for yourself. The number of patrons, 110. If 4,600 people are downloading the show on average daily in the month of May, but only 110 of them are interested in contributing on a monthly basis to keep it going, that's not a great record. That's like what? What are we talking about? One in a little less than 50. Of the people listening to the show daily. They're downloading the show and saying, yeah, okay, I hear him talking about the fact that he needs contributions to keep the thing going, but other people are taking care of that. Besides which, I don't have $25 a month to give away. I don't have $10 a month to give away. Maybe I have $5 a month to give away. What if I had $1 a month to give away? In other words, if you paid $1 for 2 hours of good entertainment and then took the other 22 installments of 2 hours, another 44 hours for free. If everybody was doing that, it would, think about that, right? If at $1 a show, forget about it, right? 4,000 down, that's $4,600 a day, $106,000 a month. At that point, we do buy a studio and we hire a whole staff and we do all these, and we're all rich when we do it too. But it's not happening. What about at 1/10 that rate? What about at 1/20 that rate? What about, now we're talking about it happening at 1/50 of the rate. And we'd love to have more of you participate, is what we're saying. And so the guilt trip is now over, but I do appreciate everyone, obviously, who chips in and does this. And I appreciate your indulgence in allowing me to do this once in a while. I hate to do it, and I'll professionalize the way I do it, too. And that's definitely in the offing. We got to get that done right. And just make the pitch and make it brief and get out. So here we go. We're getting out. We'll do it better next time, but we'll get out faster, too. All right. There's definitely other things to talk about besides my plight. Jeez. Let's move on and take a look at the rest of what I have put aside for the morning. Where are we gonna start with this? I got a couple things that are open and need some discussion and some update. Man, Where do we start with things today? Let's see. First of all, let's start here. I've got a report from The Hill that tells me this. Comes in with a startling headline. Let's open it up. White House telling agencies to ignore Dem oversight requests. That according to some report. Mark Hensch is the name of our writer here. The White House is telling federal agencies to ignore Democratic lawmakers' oversight requests in order to keep them from gaining information that could be used against President Trump. Politico reported Friday. I should probably be reading Politico instead of The Hill on this one, but I'm not. You have the Republicans leading the House, the Senate, and the White House. A White House official reportedly said, I don't think you'd have the Democrats responding to every minority member request if they were in the same position. White House, oh my gosh. White House ethics lawyer, who? Uttam Dhillon. It's Dhillon. Reportedly gave the directive at meetings with top officials from various government departments earlier this year. A White House spokeswoman, I wonder who could do it all, I wonder. A White House spokeswoman reportedly said the administration's policy is, quote, to accommodate the requests of chairmen, regardless of their political party. But of course, who are the chairmen in a Congress in which both houses have Republican majorities? Just so happens they're all Republicans. We also respond to all non-oversight inquiries, including the Senate's inquiries for purposes of providing advice and consent on nominees without regard to the political party of the requester, she said. See, so we'll do it on a bipartisan basis. Multiple agencies have, in fact, responded to minority member requests. No agencies have been directed not to respond to minority requests, except all the ones that were directed to by Uttam Dhillon, I guess, which is all of them. So it's a little internally contradictory, but hey, what's new about that? A senior Democratic aide told Politico that of 225 oversight letters Senate Democrats have sent the administration since January, most have received no response. When it comes to almost anything we've done at a federal agency, very close to 100% of those, we haven't had anything back, a second senior Democratic aide said. And at the White House, it's definitely 100%. So I guess not shocking or surprising, except it's not surprising to expect of the Trump junta, which we'll now have to call it, I guess, instead of administration, because they're not administering anything, obviously. Don't know what else to call it. Regime, I guess, is fair game. Not surprising that they would do it, but surprising in the sense that this is no way to run a government. Remember, Republicans have to show that they can govern. Remember when we all believed that? Wow. And remember when we all believed that the only way to win control of the government was you had to do more than just say, I'm not them, right? This now, we're nearing the 20th week in which the Trump administration has done nothing but be not them. All they've done is roll back Obama administration accomplishments, achievements, and commitments. I'm getting out of NAFTA. I'm getting out of the TPP. I'm getting out of the Paris Accords. I'm going to get out of NATO, for God's sake. I'm going to leave all this behind and roll back regulation after regulation after regulation. I'm going to try and repeal the Affordable Care Act. It's all been not that. Remember, though, when that wasn't enough to win power? Except it is. But that, that's a familiar traditional media bias and neoliberal, I guess people like to say, bias too. I don't know. I hate that neoliberal term. I don't really even know what it means exactly. And I've never been a fan of what seems to fall under the umbrella of their policies either. That's for sure. But I hate the term just as much. But yeah, it's, for some reason that's sort of one of those things that the media assumes is that if you're talking about a Democrat running for office or a Democrat holding office and what should they be doing, they always say, and Democrats tend to believe, yeah, it's not enough to just be not them. You got to have a positive policy agenda. And I guess we all assume that they would apply that same standard to Republicans, but in practice they never do. And Republicans are just fine. I mean, for a decade, they've been, we're just not them, right? I mean, literally, really, honest to God, I'm not even exaggerating. Think about their major policy objective for the past decade or so has been repeal, and sometimes they concede, oh, well, we ought to replace the Affordable Care Act. And how many times have we asked them, well, what is your plan to replace it with? And they've not come up with it. And we've all laughed and said, you've had X number of years to come up with a plan and you have nothing. Then they actually caught the car with this election and had the government trifecta, House, Senate, and White House, and still haven't been able to do it. They can't agree on what it is because they don't know what it is that they want to do. In other words, they have captured the governmental trifecta despite the fact that they don't have any positive agenda. And it's all been, well, we're not them. And that still apparently, allegedly won. Sure, it lost by 3 million votes. But we all, no point in trying to explain the intricacies of the electoral college to you at this point, not to mention, other suspicions we have about the manipulation of the election. But, we're sitting here, constitutionally, it appears every time I look, Donald Trump is the occupant of the White House and has all the trappings that go along with it. But interestingly, just one of those things that, Democrats, if you should take over, will insist that you now have to show that you can govern, will insist that it's not enough to just be not them. All of those things will still apply. Plus, I don't know, for now brings to mind the issue of small potatoes compared to this sort of big picture stuff, but all related. The blue slip issue, right? Which we discussed the other day, that once again, when Democrats are in power, they concede that the rules ought to be as they used to be, which gives a tremendous advantage to the minority. And then as soon as the shoe is on the other foot and Republicans take over, they begin to undo that stuff. And we've actually been on the blue slip merry-go-round for some years now. Democrats willing to recognize them, even though they know they're being used in an obstructionist fashion. Republicans immediately decrying obstructionism once they're in the majority, though they practiced it pervasively, really, when they were in the minority. Now they decry it and just simply refuse to recognize it as legitimate and undo it, even though we've put it back in place at least once. It's really crazy. Anyway, let's see. We'll move on. Certainly note to myself for further exploration. I could explore for another hour what I discussed with Arliss Bunny, really. The thought. Now I have big thoughts about how we can take on a long-term project for undoing some portion of the damage, but and instead of just being not them in the educational arena, we have a positive policy plan for replacing the economics and business curriculum as it's currently taught, and that will be at the heart of everything. I'll think about that over the weekend, and we'll return to that theme, no doubt. I can't promise it for Monday, but eventually we'll get back to it, and you'll say, when we do, yes, I'm old hand at this. I heard it on Kagro in the Morning that other day, whenever it was. All right, other things to catch up on. Man, where do we go with this one? There's so many choices for directions to go in this. Let me start with this one. It's sort of still on topic. Doesn't get away entirely from Trump and Trump Russia anyway, but I think you need to see this one. If you haven't yet, Politico, this one was traded widely on Twitter the other day. Russia escalates spy games after years of U.S. neglect. Lawmakers and intelligence officials say the United States missed opportunities to crack down on Russian espionage efforts. There's even a couple of shots at Obama in this one. Interesting, and I think fair ones too, and I think we all know why they happened, but I don't know. This seems like a great illustration of a lot of things here. I wanted to include this one. Ali Watkins on this one. Is that Ali or Ali Watkins? That's a good question. Any identification of our writer down at the bottom here? Let's see. There's a staff bio here. I'm just now curious, and it doesn't say anything, so it doesn't help us. So I can't tell whether that's Ali or Ali, like Allison Watkins, or Ali, although Watkins, I don't know. Who can say for sure with all the various ways that could come to pass to have the name Ali Watkins? It can happen, but I guess if you had to bet, you'd go with the Ali. All right. Anyway, in the throes of the 2016 campaign, the FBI found itself with an escalating problem. Russian diplomats, whose travel was supposed to be tracked by the State Department, were going missing. And that was when the State Department was fully staffed and cared about tracking Russian diplomats inside the United States. Imagine now with no staff and an administration that is actively pro-Russian and will do nothing to track them. The diplomats, widely assumed to be intelligence operatives, and that's the problem, would eventually turn up in odd places, often in middle-of-nowhere USA. One was found on a beach, nowhere near where he was supposed to be, but I mean, in the abstract, absent all these other concerns, if somebody turned up on a beach, I would say, well, though it was unexpected, that's not abnormal. I'd turn up on a beach if I could. But okay, there's more than that. One particularly bizarre case relayed by a U.S. intelligence official found another one turned up wandering around in the middle of the desert. So maybe it's a sand thing. I don't know. I doubt it. Interestingly, though, both seem to be lingering where underground fiber optic cables tend to run. Although, honestly, do fiber optic cables tend to run on a beach? I don't know. We'll take their word for it that this is accurately reported. According to another U.S. intelligence official, they find these guys driving around in circles in Kansas, where there's probably very little sand. It's a pretty aggressive effort. Aggressive effort at what? Well, it's a trend that has led intelligence officials to conclude that the Kremlin is waging a quiet effort to map the United States telecommunications infrastructure, perhaps preparing for an opportunity to disrupt it. Half the time, they're never confronted. The official, who declined to be identified, discussing intelligence matters, said of the incidents, "We assume they're mapping our infrastructure." And I think that's a pretty good assumption. It would be something they would want to do, yeah, they just wouldn't want to be caught at it. But they are being caught at it, and I guess they don't care because we don't do anything about it. As the country, and Washington in particular, borders on near obsession over whether affiliates of Donald Trump's campaign colluded with the Kremlin to swing the 2016 presidential election, U.S. intelligence officials say Moscow's espionage ground game is growing stronger and more brazen than ever. So time to give them back their spy complex, right? It's a problem that's sparking increasing concern from the intelligence community, including the FBI. After neglecting the Russian threat for a decade, the U.S. was caught flat-footed by Moscow's election operation. Now officials are scrambling to figure out how to contain a sophisticated intelligence network that's festered and strengthened at home after years' worth of inattention. We've definitely been ignoring Russia for the last 15 years, another intelligence official said, calling the Kremlin resurgent. Politico spoke with half a dozen current and former U.S. intelligence officials about Russian spy strategies. All requested anonymity to openly discuss espionage. I guess that's understandable, right? They've just got so many bodies. Or rather, I guess I should say, they've just got so many bodies. The first intelligence official said of the Russians, it's not about what we know is happening, it's about what we don't know. I guess in that case, I would say maybe the first reading is right. They've got so many bodies, they can put them everywhere. I don't know. That's an odd one. It's one of the most poorly kept secrets in the intelligence community. The Russian effort is a startlingly open and aggressive one and often falls in a complex legal gray zone. It really is rather brilliant in this sense. For example, the second official said, diplomats wandering around the desert might be in violation of certain travel requirements, but it's not necessarily illegal. Most U.S. intelligence officials can relay stories of run-ins with Russian intelligence operatives, often moonlighting as lobbyists, diplomats, and businessmen, hanging around popular Washington happy hours. And of course, now they can hang around at the happy hour at the Trump Hotel, right? It's an open assumption that they use Capitol Hill and its public office buildings as a farming ground for potential recruits. And the presumed agents aren't hard to spot. According to officials, an oft-traded joke is to go to one of Washington's handful of Russian restaurants and look for the guy in a tracksuit. That is interesting. I understand and I feel that's instinctively I feel like that's truth, but I think it maybe because it's like stereotypical. Why did they switch away from why wouldn't they be in button down, real suits? But it's because I guess increasingly they're more mobster than businessman, more mobster than government official, apparatchik anyway. As the Russians continue aggressively pushing legal boundaries in both the United States and Moscow, there's a tangible frustration among U.S. intelligence officials and on Capitol Hill that the U.S. has consistently missed its chance to crack down on Moscow's spy games. For years, lawmakers on both sides of the aisle, pressed a hesitant Obama White House to crack down on some of the Kremlin's more brazen stateside maneuvers. I want to just reinforce that again. lawmakers from both sides of the aisle. That means Republicans. That means a significant number of Republicans, I would guess, pressed a hesitant Obama White House, and you can see why they would do that. It's a chance to attack the Obama White House. They're soft on the Russians. In other words, before they finally figured out that they might actually benefit from Russian interference in our elections and from Russian espionage, they were traditionally concerned with Russian influence and espionage. I mean, this was the part that made, back when things made sense, we thought we understood. Well, now we're baffled by Republican indifference to this stuff, and the reason we're baffled is because we remember that they were, we remember the days when they were, vigorously, it was a prerequisite to be in the Republican Party, a virulent anti-communist. And of course, even though the Russians had supposedly set communism aside, in the past, there was this lack of trust. There was this traditional antagonism with the Russians, and how quickly they threw it over the side was astonishing. But it made me want to find out who were these lawmakers on both sides. I would love to know now, the names of the lawmakers, particularly from the Republican side of the aisle, who pressed the hesitant Obama White House to crack down on some of the Kremlin's more brazen stateside maneuvers, as they say. There was a general feeling that this was not getting the attention it deserved, said Senator Ron Wyden, who is, of course, on the Democratic side of the aisle, a member of the Senate Intelligence Committee who has supported the panel's efforts in pressing the White House to toe a harder line with the Kremlin. Around last summer, that tension reached a fever pitch. Now, I skimmed this article yesterday, and it occurs to me, I don't think that they got the name of a single member from the Republican side of the aisle who pressed the White House, or who at the time was willing to admit that they recognized an increased Russian threat. Why not? That is a major, major failing if that's the case. So let's see if they've updated things at all. But that's a huge hole in this article, because I want to know very badly. I know Senator Wyden was into it. That doesn't do me any good. What I'm looking for is, I want to know who's flip-flopped for political advantage. I want to know the names of Republicans who, when there was political advantage in pressing the Obama White House and not being hard enough on the Russians, did that. And then no political advantage, and in fact political disadvantage for pressing the Trump White House for not being hard enough on the Russians, have been silent. Those are the names I need. Wyden is not the name I need in this. But that I got. So where were we? Lawmakers frustrated by Russian, and this will illustrate exactly why it's so important to get this stuff. Lawmakers frustrated by Russian diplomats' repeated violations of travel rules inserted a provision in last year's intelligence authorization bill that would have required Russian diplomats to provide ample notice to the State Department if they planned to travel more than 50 miles from where they were based, and further would have required the FBI to validate that travel. According to several sources involved in the discussions at that time, the administration, and it was the Obama administration, fought desperately and failed to get those provisions taken out of the bill. Time out. That means, of course, that those provisions remained in the bill. And if this happened last year, then we're still talking about a bill that succeeded in a Republican-dominated House and a Republican-dominated Senate. Republicans in the majority in both houses, and it passed, which means it had overwhelming support among the Republican ranks in both houses. Together, the majorities of Republicans in both houses said, over the objections of the Obama administration, we insist that the State Department and FBI do something about what we recognize as overly aggressive Russian espionage in the United States, aimed at what? We're not even sure. They may have had some idea, and I think later on in the article we do get some idea that they did. In other words, this brings us back to the secretly recorded discussion between Kevin McCarthy and Paul Ryan and others. They knew, and they knew a long time ago, that Russia was up to this. We know that they knew by early last summer exactly what the target was and how they were trying to influence elections, and that it had been observed by Ryan and McCarthy both and had been agreed to by both, that the Russians were actively using their propaganda machines to undermine democratic elections in the West, including in the United States. And they, instead of doing something about it, said, we may gain by this. We may be able to slash the tax rates. We may be able to pass conservative legislation that we have wanted for decades, even if it's implemented by a crazy president who sold out to the Russians and validated, quote unquote, validated by a populace, a voting populace that also has been manipulated by the Russians. And we're good with that. Even though we think it's bad for Ukraine, we think it's bad for the rest of Western Europe's democracies, we think it's bad for America, but we're in anyway. We're all in. We're on board. We're on the Russia bus. They accepted that in exchange for some additional personal power and maybe being able to cut their own taxes and keep some more dollars. Really rather amazing how cheaply they sold this country out. But that makes you, just to bring it back to the article, this means that there are numerous Republicans still in the House and Senate who insisted when Obama was in the White House that something had to be done about tracking Russian activity aimed at undermining American democracy and Western democracy in general, and that as soon as Trump occupied the White House, they dropped their objections. Amazing. Ridiculous. I mean, they dropped their objections even before Trump was in the White House because they thought they had a shot at winning the White House. But, so who are these strong advocates? There's got to be some big names who fought the administration and forced these provisions to remain in last year's intelligence authorization bill. And lots of Democrats too, but I guess they're still at the job of trying to dig this out. Republicans have dropped it. That's pretty astonishing. So around that same time, oh, and by the way, I guess I should also mention, Republicans apparently have no particular issue over with the fact that the State Department, now run by Republicans, they used to press the Obama White House and the Obama State Department, you gotta track these people. Now, not only are they not worried about whether or not they're tracking the people, they're apparently not worried about the fact that the State Department is staffed at perhaps 20% strength. They can't follow people even if they wanted to. They can't track this stuff. All those people were fired. All the people who track that stuff are out. Why? Because Obama employed them. Remember, we just have to be not them. No, we have to have a positive policy agenda. No, you don't. Around that same time, the article continues, as the intelligence authorization bill just mentioned, two key Democratic lawmakers informed the White House of plans to publicly finger Russia as the foreign power behind a widespread effort to manipulate an ongoing U.S. election, the ongoing election in 2016, something no official U.S. government entity had yet done. Fearful of escalation, the administration tried to get Senator Dianne Feinstein and Representative Adam Schiff, then the two leading Democrats on the Senate and House Intelligence Committees, respectively, to back off. Why? Well, there are other considerations. The California lawmakers, both from California, didn't, and they released the statement. Then, backed into a corner by Congress, because they wouldn't back off, the administration released a statement saying the same a week later. We know this to be true, we just don't want it to come out. But if you're going to insist on it, well then, we have to admit that this is true, we're going to do the same thing. Why did they do it? The Obama administration's tentativeness in the weeks leading up to November 8th, especially in the high-stakes context of a presidential election, is something that still bewilders corners of the intelligence world. Some speculate that Secretary of State John Kerry, desperate for a peace deal in Syria, as was Jared Kushner, urged the White House to lie low. Some blame it on a fear of igniting a cyber war, and still others say it stemmed from a generalized underestimation of the Russian threat. Blaming one factor, the officials said, or at least one of the officials said, is oversimplified, but the frustration and regret is tangible. But you can understand, and I think, it's a regrettable decision in hindsight, obviously. But yeah, I could see where the Obama administration might have said, yeah, you know what, heightening tensions with Russia now, I don't necessarily think is the best idea. Now, of course, that we've discovered just how damaging things are, it sounded like a pretty good idea in retrospect. But I don't know. Obviously, nobody knew exactly what the outcome was going to be. And when we believed that we would be electing a new administration that could then be prevailed upon to decide for itself how aggressive it wanted to be in pushing back with Russia, it would be fine. What we didn't know is we were going to end up with an administration that not only wouldn't feel comfortable pushing back on Russia, but is instead directed from Russia. That's troublesome. Underscoring all of this is that the Kremlin shows none of the same reluctance at home, nor does it show any propensity to abide by the gentleman's espionage rules that the U.S. tends to uphold. Another such situation, now writ large, blue slips writ large, sometimes to the chagrin of its own spy corps. We can't even leave the compound over there without being followed, the first U.S. intelligence official said. Right here in the United States, we lose track of our Russian diplomats/spies. We assume that all Russian diplomats are spies, or at least we used to, back in the good old days, and vice versa. So it's okay, right? All Russians assume all American diplomats are spies too. What do we do about it? Well, we tell them to notify us when they leave. We try and sort of track generally where they're going to be. What do they do about it? They follow you in person, side by side occasionally, whenever you leave any of the buildings in the American diplomatic compound. And that's on a good day, because there's other examples that are, well, less good. Very, very not good. One publicized incident continues to agitate officials in Washington. In June of last year, a U.S. diplomat, remember this, was returning to the embassy in Moscow when a guard with the FSB, the Domestic Russian Security Service, exploded from his booth on the compound's perimeter and assaulted him. A surveillance video shows the guard tackling the man and throwing him to the ground before the U.S. diplomat was able to drag himself inside the doors of the embassy to safety. Remember? The U.S. diplomat, whom Politico confirmed was actually a CIA officer, they were correct in all that, had done the impossible. He had lost, why did they beat him up? He had lost his tails as he maneuvered in Moscow. Infuriated, the Russians sent an FSB guard that the man wouldn't recognize to wait outside the embassy for his inevitable return. The officer was beaten so badly, he was immediately flown out of the country for urgent medical attention. So that's what happened. Just for losing it, just to see if it could be done. Like, I mean, you know, the spies, they get used to it. The diplomats, they get used to it. I know I'm being followed. So just for fun, just to see if it's possible, can I lose the guy tailing me? And he did. And they reacted the way you would think like a Trump would react. In this, Trump and Putin, I guess, appear to be very similar. You did that thing. You embarrassed me by losing my guy. I'm going to hire someone. I'm going to make sure and assign the job to somebody else. When he comes back, I want you to beat the crap out of that guy. Beat the crap out of a guy with an American diplomatic passport. Yes, we all know that they're all CIA spies, and just as vice versa, they know all our people are spies. But this is one of those things you don't do. You don't beat the crap out of somebody. You could try to arrest him, but you got to handle it carefully. If you really think he's into espionage, well, we can't involve ourselves in those kind of legal entanglements. We'll lose. I know that. Or we'll lose in the eyes of but you could beat the crap out of him. I mean, you'll lose in the eyes of public opinion there, but not at home, not domestically. They'll think it's great. So in case you're worried about where a Trump administration might be going in the future, all the dystopian visions you've had if you think we'll follow the Putin model, well, you're validated. So the account of the beating the crap out of the guy was confirmed by another person familiar with the incident, and of course anyone who read the news reports. They are far more aggressive on counterintelligence issues in Russia than we are here, one of the officials said. It's these incidents that worry and frustrate the Americans. The unspoken rules of spying mean nothing to the Kremlin, just as the unspoken rules of everything else mean nothing to Trump. They agree to rules and then they break them, said another U.S. official. Sound familiar? Former CIA Director John Brennan made reference to this frustration in recent congressional testimony. Though he stopped short of explicitly discussing the June 2016 incident in Moscow, he told lawmakers that he had brought up the broader harassment issue to his Russian counterpart at Russian State Security Services last August. I first told him, as I had several times previously, that the continued mistreatment and harassment of U.S. diplomats in Moscow was intolerable and needed to stop, Brennan said. The CIA declined to comment. The FBI did not respond to an official request for comment by deadline. So, let's see. By the way, a correction. I guess we read the correct version of it, but a previous version of the story had stated that the man who was beat up outside of the Moscow embassy was a CIA agent. He was a CIA officer, not an agent. Slightly different there, but I don't know if the Russians agreed to abide by those differences. They don't agree to abide by anything else, so I suppose not hard to imagine. Okay. So, I don't know. I thought that was something you needed to have for the weekend. Not everything that you need to have for the weekend, to be sure. There's so many other little bits and pieces that I've wanted to share with you that I just, I had such an interesting discussion with Arliss today, and I'm really glad we did it because I had no idea we were going to go there, but it was fascinating, and now I have some great ideas, so I'm happy about that. So many other things that I wanted to share. We'll share them next week. That'll keep you hanging on, and you know what? The more contributions we get, the more I feel guilty about not sharing these things. One day maybe I can launch, if I really want to raise some money, we can launch some sort of KITM premium that you have to pay for in order to get, but that seems so undaily coast-like, I'm reluctant to do it. Anyway, one last thing I wanted to share with you. A couple people sent me this the other day when I mentioned it, that we had not yet gotten an explanation for the weird red flashing lights in the windows of the second floor residence of the White House. We do have an explanation, and I think it sounds pretty plausible too. I guess the New York Post was the one that I got first that actually published an explanation. The real reason red lights were flashing in the White House windows, perfectly plausible. It seems there were some emergency vehicles outside the White House. You know, they have flashing red lights. You've probably seen them on ambulances and fire engines and the like. And, Washington, D.C. is a fairly sizable city. These things can happen. Apparently they were responding to an emergency at Lafayette Square Park immediately across from Pennsylvania Avenue, adjacent to the White House. And in what we were seeing was, of course, reflections in the windows of those flashing red lights. And at the angle from which the video was taken, it's not going to be reflected in all the windows. It's just those two. So, coincidental? Yes. Believable? Yeah, actually. I mean, it's probably the best explanation for it. What else would he be doing? I mean, he's awake late at night, but okay. So, they were pretty big flashing lights, and you'd think you wouldn't be able to hide any kind of emergency, and you'd think that you'd see flashing lights in more of the windows if it was some kind of an internal alarm system. Internal, not eternal. The eternal alarm system is what we're on now with Trump in the White House. Anyway, I thought a pretty good explanation. Might as well bring it up in case you were still wondering what had happened there. That's sort of a follow-up on a sort of interesting story. Much more to come, of course, unless all of it is blown away over the weekend. Entirely possible now that President Bannon appears to be back in charge at the White House. Lots of writing on that. I'm sure that situation will change by Monday, and we'll have President someone else for the first couple of days of the week, and then back to President anybody but actually Donald Trump. Okay. Since we missed so much, it would now be a good time to check in with what you'll hear on the after show coming up next right here on Netroots Radio. Let's take a look at what they've got. The Trump White House orders federal agencies to blow off any and all requests for info and any and all from any and all Democrats. We did note that. Fake ICE protesters plastered all over D.C. orders citizens to be the Stasi quo by turning in immigrants and stray tourists. Wonder who's behind that one. And OMB Director Tricky Mick Mulvaney angrily orders the dismantling of the Congressional Budget Office because of a $2 trillion error in his own math. Another big story they'll be following up on next on the after show. What do they got on the last half? Former Major League Baseball star and arch-conservative U.S. Senator Jim Bunning, who died last week at the age of 89, transformed a weak and feckless organization into what is now the most powerful union in the country. And a cataclysmic collision between two black holes coming up.
From Daily Coos Radio
after this
on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
Just to clarify, because you always need to clarify when you're talking about a cataclysmic collision between two black holes, it happened 3 billion light years away. It's not happening in the White House right now, though it seems like it. Anyway, it confirms another part of Einstein's theory of relativity. Seems like he was a pretty smart guy. That's not news, but it's interesting as hell. Stay tuned for more on the After Show next.